Open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew 14, or if you're using the Bible app, the YouVersion Bible app, you can go to the left side. There is a live events button you can click and find this morning's notes. That was great. Great rendition of Amazing Grace. Caleb actually leaned over to me and asked, is that the same Amazing Grace that we sing? Because I do it a little different when I put the boys to bed. I sing Amazing Grace, but to the tune of Gilligan's Island, which is appropriate, having the boat on stage. So it's the same words, a little bit different tune. And I'm not going to sing that for you now. Maybe if you find me after, I may do a musical in the hallway. We can get that down. But Matthew chapter 14. Back during World War II, over in the East, in Japan, there was a particular battle that didn't go so well for the Allies. Actually, the Allies lost the battle and had to surrender, and over 10,000 of our troops were taken captive and were marched from the battle to different prison camps. And it was actually called the Battle of Bataan, and that's where the Bataan Death March came from. And they're marching through this terrible terrain, through the Filipino jungles, and by the hundreds and thousands, the prisoners were dropping dead as they're succumbing to the heat, succumbing to the way they're being treated by the captors as they're being marched to prison camps through this jungle. And about 500 of them came to rest at this one particular prison camp. I'm not going to try to say the name because it is pretty difficult, but 500 of the Allied troops, as well as some civilians, were put into this particular prison camp, and our guys knew about it. They knew what was going on. They actually even knew where they were being held captive. And so some of our Army Rangers, as well as some of our scouts, and some of the Filipino guerrilla fighters, not Filipino guerrillas, that would have been super intense to stick guerrillas on them, but Filipino guerrilla fighters and our Rangers and Scouts were going to do this mission to get back some of these prisoners. And they didn't have time to really flesh out the plan because they wanted to rescue them as soon as possible before many of them could die. Actually, one of the men who was involved says that we couldn't rehearse it. Anything of this nature, you'd ordinarily want to practice it over and over for weeks in advance, get more information, build models, discuss all of the contingencies, work out all of the kinks, but we didn't have time for that. It was now or it was not going to happen. And so they went under the cover of darkness and they ran practically 30 miles across enemy lines to where this camp was. And by the time they got there, it was still dark and they began to attack. After having run 30 miles, they started to attack this prison camp. And the battle only lasted 30 minutes. It only lasted 30 minutes. There were hundreds of Axis people in the prison camp, but the battle only lasted 30 minutes. And the Allied soldiers were able to get out all 500 of the prisoners with minimal casualties. Now, no, I didn't say fatalities. I said with minimal people hurt. They were able to get those people out, march them the 30 miles back across the enemy lines, and return them home. And it is called the Great Raid. It's been in many movies. It's been depicted because of not only how overwhelming that was to have that many people captured in battle, but that it was so successful that they were able to rescue all 500 of the prisoners. And something that this same guy who was involved in the rescue, what he said was afterwards, people were asking him about, were the people that you rescued so grateful? Were their families grateful? And he said, people everywhere try to thank us. I think the thanks should go the other way. I'll be grateful for the rest of my life that I had a chance to do something in this war that was not destructive. Nothing for me can ever compare with the satisfaction I got from helping to free our prisoners. And so they did a great thing in rescuing these people who thought there was no way they were ever going home. They thought this was the end. We are going to die here in this prison camp. And then they heard the gunfire and saw their friends pulling them out, taking them home. What we're going to see today in Matthew chapter 14 is what it means to be rescued, what it means to be saved, what it means to have Jesus extend his hand to us and pull us out of terrible situations. We're going to start down in verse 22, but before we get there, what has just happened in Matthew 14 is Jesus has fed the 5,000, one of the famous miracles of Jesus. He was actually trying to be alone, and the crowd came to him. And it says there were 5,000 men, not counting women and children. Many scholars believe that there were 12,000 to 15,000 total people there. It got to be evening. They didn't have any food. They found one kid's sack lunch, and Jesus was able to feed the 12,000 people out of this one kid's lunch. And not only were they able just to snack, it says that they were filled. I mean, we're talking Thanksgiving Day full here. And they had a bunch left over afterwards. And so all the people saw this. All of his disciples saw this. And there began to be talk among the people seeing what Jesus did. They saw what he did, and they wanted him to do more. Not just more miracles, but they wanted him to lead them, to be a political leader. And Jesus responds to that with action. In Matthew 14, verse 22, it says, "Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds." And so where Jesus was with the crowds was this big flat area, a little bit hilly. There was a big lake next to it and a mountain next to it as well. And so Jesus makes his disciples get into a boat that's there. I mean, this is immediate. I mean, without hesitation, he says, get into the boat. He forces them in the boat and sends them on. And John actually records this same scene in John chapter 6. And he says that the crowd was stirred up into a frenzy. They wanted to make Jesus a king. They wanted Jesus to overthrow the Roman government. And Jesus, that wasn't why he came. That wasn't his purpose. His purpose in coming was spiritual. He wanted to have eternal significance on these people, not just temporary political significance. And so he sets out to dismiss the crowd. He put a stop to the craziness. Now, I find it interesting, though, that in all the recordings of this story, it doesn't say how Jesus got rid of the crowd. It just says that he dismissed them. This crowd who wanted to make him a king, somehow Jesus convinced them, you guys need to go home now. And so Jesus gets these 12,000 people to leave and leave him alone, leave the situation, go home and sleep on it. He quiets them, sends them out. However he does it, he just does it. And we get to verse 23. And we see what he does next. It says, "And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone." And so however long it took Jesus to dismiss the crowd, he got the massive amount of people to go home, and then he secluded himself. He sent the disciples away, he sent the crowds away, then he goes up on the nearby mountain by himself. You see, the crowds, before he fed the 5,000, the crowds had originally found Jesus when he was already trying to find time to be by himself. He had just been informed that his cousin John the Baptist had died a gruesome death. And so Jesus tried to get out there, get by himself, get some dedicated prayer time, just he and God, but the crowds would not let him be by himself. They saw him and they wanted to experience him. They wanted him to heal them. They wanted their concerns to be met. They didn't think about what could be going on emotionally inside of Jesus, having just learned about his cousin's death, but they wanted their stuff taken care of. And Jesus saw the people. He saw their hurt, saw their needs, and he set aside his own feelings of grief for a time so that he could minister to these people. He had great compassion on them. And so after he taught them and he fed them, he still sought time alone with God in prayer. He was very intentional about sending everyone away so that he could get his time alone with God. So Jesus goes up on the mountain. Verse 24. "But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them." Now the lake itself here that they're trying to cross is only about 4.5 miles wide. And we learn from, again, John's recording of this incident that they had only made it about 3.5 miles across. So they still had another mile to go. And they were rowing and they were trying to get through it, you see, because this body of water was infamous for sudden and violent storms. And so this storm had whipped up and they were having real trouble getting across. And it's a whole interesting scenario because we know that 4 out of the 12 guys in the boat made their living in boats. That's what they did. They knew water. They knew how to manipulate the boat, how to get through storms and get through the wind. But even with that, they're not able to do it. These guys, who this is their job, and they still can't get across this water as they try to row. And they're rowing for hours and hours and hours, and they still can't get to the other side of the lake. And so the storm, what I find interesting is how the scripture depicts the storm. It's almost as if the storm is wielding the wind and the waves like weapons, just beating against this boat as the guys inside the boat are trying to hold on to anything they can to keep from being thrown out. Verse 25. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Now, the 4th watch of the night, it's in the pre-dawn hours. It's between 3 and 6 a.m. So they've been out there rowing all night long. Jesus has been up on the mountain praying by himself for hours. And as he sat there praying, remember the mountain is right next to the sea. As he sat there praying, he's able to watch the storm out there on the water. And he's praying and he's watching the storm. Time continued to stretch on, and undoubtedly the disciples in the boat are thinking, are we ever going to get to land? They're thinking it's never going to come. They're thinking this is how it's going to end. We're going to die right here in the boat. You know, how ironic. You know, we've got 4 fishermen here who know water, that we're going to die right here. And they're not knowing when this is going to end. There's no end in sight. And Jesus comes out to them on the water. You see, in reality, they couldn't see Jesus coming to the rescue. All they could think about was where they were in the boat, the storm, how bad their situation was. They were focused on what was right in front of them, and if they had only pulled their eyes up, they could have seen Jesus right there with them in the water. But their vision was so focused on what they were grabbing a hold of that they missed it. But that's the same with us. We cannot see that Jesus is coming to our rescue because we are so busy looking for a handhold instead of looking for Jesus. We need to test our vision. I see some of you are wearing glasses and some of you undoubtedly have contacts, but you know, when you go to the eye doctor, you usually don't dread it as much as maybe going to the dentist or going to the regular doctor, but as you begin to think about what goes on at the eye doctor, you know, you sit in that chair and he shines the bright light in your eyes and you can see your own veins and it's really weird, and then he puts your face against that thing that 100 other people's faces have been against that day, and you're thinking about, I hope those people, you know, are clean, and you look through that, and he clicks through the different lenses as he tries to tell what is better for you. And sometimes he's flipping too fast and you're not ready for it, and you have to tell him you need to slow down. And you're trying to read the lines on the wall. And I don't know about you, but this has happened to me before. As you're reading the lines and you don't want to really admit that some of the lines are blurrier than they are, and so you try to guess at what the letters are, and you know, that's an O, and it's like a W, and it doesn't not even close. And it's happened to me is that the doctor will kind of laugh at me because I get every single one of them wrong. And he won't admit that that's what he's laughing at, but he knows that I got them all wrong. And actually, there was one time he left the line up there so that when I could put my glasses back on and could see, I could realize that I read every single letter incorrectly. And it wasn't even close. I mean, we're talking like O for W or like, you know, P for Q. I mean, it just wasn't even close. And but then you get to that one test. You know, even, I hate this thing even more than dilating your eyes, even more than the blurriness that you have to get, and with the cool sunglasses you get after that, is there's this little tube that's on the end of this gun that he wheels out, and you put your chin again on a thing that 100 other people have done, and it gets right up to your eye, and you can feel it with your eyelashes. It's that close, and you know something's coming. You know it's coming, and he said, just keep your eye open, and you're thinking, I don't want to keep my eye open. There's something sticking in my eye. And he says, just keep it open. And then no countdown, no anything. He pulls a little trigger, and this puff of air just hits you in the eyeball, and you feel like he's just torturing you, you know? And there's actually been a time when it took 2 or 3 times. He said, you closed your eyes too fast. And I said, no, I didn't. I felt it. It was there. and then you have to flip it over to your other eye and do it again. And you can feel it, you know it's coming, and you hate it as you're sitting there, and he's just waiting to pull that thing, just waiting until you can't hold your eye open any longer, and he just hits it for the last second. And it's frustrating, and it's one of those worst feelings because you anticipate it. You just don't know when it's going to come, and then it hits you like somebody punches you in the face. And all that is good, though, because all of those things, the dilation, the air in your eyeball, looking at the lines of letters on the wall, it's all there to test your vision so that you don't get the wrong prescription in your glasses or your contacts and go and drive your car not realizing that there are other cars out there because you can't see them. Testing your vision is a good thing. And so when it comes to spiritually, we need to test our vision. You see, Jesus here in this passage we see was intentional about focusing heavenward. He went and got his time alone. The disciples, though, in the moment are focused on their immediate surroundings. Sometimes we need to expand our field of vision to see that God is moving even in the midst of the storm. If our vision is properly fixed on the purpose of God, though the way may be difficult, if we're fixed on God's purpose, we will find strength and courage that we did not know were there. And so we have the disciples in the boat. They finally notice that there's something out there moving on the water. I picture it as though there was maybe a lightning flash, and they saw this figure out there in the water, and they began to get a little bit scared. Look at verse 26. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. Now, in the middle of a rainstorm, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a huge lake, the disciples see some sort of figure that seems to be walking on top of the water. Now, this is the thing that campfire stories are made up of. I mean, these guys are in this boat. There shouldn't be anything else out here. It's a storm. It'd be crazy if somebody was out here. Not just, somebody in a boat, but somebody actually walking on top of the water. They began to freak out a little bit. And there was fear already present because of the storm. It only intensifies at seeing this potentially unexplainable thing. And so they scream that it's a ghost. These grown men scream that it's a ghost, and then they just start screaming. I mean, that's what the passage says. They cried out in fear, probably expressing themselves in less than manly ways. I'm sure some of you have seen some of the most manly men, when they see something that scares them, react in a less than manly way. And a frequency comes out of their mouth you didn't know was humanly possible. And they start beginning to dance. Maybe it's a spider. I don't know. I mentioned to the choir there was a spider in the boat earlier in the week. And so if you saw one of them filled with the Spirit, that might have been the spider. And so these grown men, some of them huge and burly, being fishermen, are screaming in fear because they see something, a shadow moving on top of the water out there. Look at verse 27. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." So the expression of fear that the disciples display, Jesus speaks immediately. He heard their cries of help, their cries of fear, and he spoke to those ready to listen. He tells them to take heart. To take heart. This indicates that even though they're in the midst of a genuinely scary situation, they should find courage because of their proximity to Jesus. Jesus is nearby, so all of this other stuff should not be nearly as frightful. Jesus was near them, but they did not recognize it. Now, one of the most amazing things I find about this passage is, remember, they're in a storm. There is lightning, there is thunder, there is the waves, there is the rain, there is the wind. Jesus is some distance off. And I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to somebody outside in a storm. It's hard to hear them, especially when you're out on a lake in a storm. It's really hard. But somehow Jesus supernaturally allowed these guys in the boat to hear his voice, to hear his intonation, and know it was him as he is way out from where they are. They hear him speaking to them, and they begin to change how they feel a little bit, one of them more than the others. Look at verse 28. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So Peter here responds to Jesus' assertion with an incredibly bold statement. If it's you, let me come out there. Let me walk on the water also. Peter first acknowledges with whom he's speaking. He says, Lord, not just sir, but Lord in the vein of a divine master. He's making a supernatural request of Jesus. He's not necessarily asking Jesus to prove himself here. He is witnessing the great power of God in Jesus walking on the water, and Peter wants to experience that power of God as well. He wants to be a part of what God is currently doing in that moment. Look at verse 29. Jesus responds to Peter. He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came to Jesus. Jesus invited Peter to be part in the power of God. Jesus didn't prevent Peter. Jesus didn't force Peter to act. Peter expressed a desire to be used by God, and then he willingly followed Jesus' direction. Peter demonstrated right in this moment great fear. He stepped over great faith. He stepped over the side of the boat and onto the top of the water. And the boat was being tossed around. The waves are still pounding. The wind is still howling. And Peter throws his leg over the side of the boat and got out. Now, he's the only disciple to do so. All 12 of them saw Jesus feed the 12,000 people, but only Peter was the one who in that moment believed in Jesus. The rest of the disciples, again, in the storm, did not. This was a test, so to speak, for Peter. And sometimes in the middle of a storm, we need to test our mettle. We need to test our strength, our courage to see what we are made of. In college, my first year off at college, and then my last year, I roomed with a guy who was a Marine. That summer before my senior year at college, he had gone to OCS. It's Officer Candidate School. You could have done it in two different ways. If you wanted to be an officer as opposed to an enlisted man, you would go to this boot camp, so to speak. You could have done it in two different ways. You could have gone in two separate 6-week courses, or you could just take it all in one shot and do it in 10 weeks. And I thought he was smart and did it in 10 weeks. I would imagine after you got done with the 6, you wouldn't want to go back and do another 6. And so he went and he did it. He said it was one of the hardest things he's ever done in his life. He says there were times where they wouldn't eat for a long time, times where they wouldn't sleep for a long time, and then be expected to make very complex decisions in hard battle strategy scenario moments. And he would be out there leading a team of guys to accomplish a specific goal in training, and he hadn't slept for 3 days, and he'd only eaten 2 meals in 3 days, and he's got to make these specific decisions and not mess up. He told me one time, I thought it was fascinating, that every once in a while they would get a day off, and instead of going to the movies or to a bar or to do something that was ill-advised, something that God would not like, he said all of these guys, whether they were raised in church by godly parents or raised by the most heathen of people in the world, every single one of them, we would pool our money together, about 10 of us, we would buy a bunch of pizza, rent one hotel room, and just sleep. He said we wouldn't want to do anything else. We would just want to eat our pizza and sleep for 12 hours before we had to be back. We had no desire to do anything else because we were just so exhausted. But he did say that he was in the best physical shape of his life during those 10 weeks. And then when he finally went over to Afghanistan and Iraq, even though he wasn't quite, as many are not, emotionally ready for some of the things they encounter, physically, he had been tested, he had been tried, and physically he was ready to do what they were asking of him to do because he had been tested during that 10-week period. And that has to be the case with us sometimes. We need our mettle tested. We need to see who we are. We need to see our limits. And here in this moment, Peter, in exercising this great faith and stepping out over the edge of the boat, he is demonstrating something in the midst of the storm that none of the other disciples are demonstrating. You see, once our vision is focused on Jesus, we must express great courage. Because without courage, we're just sitting in the boat in the middle of a storm, wondering if we're ever going to reach land. It's pitiful. It's hopeless. We need the confidence that comes from looking into the eyes of Jesus and knowing what he desires of us. Courage and that first step are just as important as having good vision, because you can see 2020 all day long, but if you do not have the courage enough to take the first step, what good is it to be able to see spiritually? You need vision and a willingness to follow through. So Peter here, we have him. He steps out of the security of the boat and into the wide open space where the only protection he has is the invitation of Jesus. Look at verse 30. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And so Peter believed initially. He had great confidence initially. He believed and trusted. But then when his vision wandered away from Jesus and Jesus' intended path for him, something other than God's plan happened. He was very confident while he was in the boat. Even though he was in the middle of a storm, a long way from Jesus, he was confident because he had something he could hold on to. When he stepped out of the boat, he was still confident because he saw Jesus. But then when he took his eyes off of Jesus, everything changed. Even though his circumstances were the same, he was still in the storm, his perspective changed. He had believed. He still needed Jesus, though, to rescue him from his current predicament. Now, in that verse, it's something I've never really thought about before as I was studying this. It says, when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to step on top of water, but when I picture it, it's not a matter of beginning to sink. It is you're sunk. You know, I mean, you're out there and you're on top of it and you try to stand on the water and all of a sudden you're under the water. I mean, when you dive in the water, it's not a slow process. I mean, you're above it and then you're below it. I mean, it's like that. But Peter, as he is on top of the water and realizing what's going on, as he starts to plunge like an anchor, he screams, "Lord, save me." Now remember, there's the boat, there's Peter, and Jesus is still a little ways away. And we get to verse 31. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And so then, all of a sudden, Jesus is right next to Peter, grabbing a hold of his arm. Peter had asked for rescue, asked for help, and Jesus gave it to him. Jesus pulled Peter out of the water and back up on top of it. And Peter, who had demonstrated great faith by getting out of the boat, walking on the water, while the rest of the disciples are still clinging to the sides of the boat in the storm, Jesus calls Peter out for his lack of faith. He says, "Why did you doubt?" Peter had lost his faith. He had lost sight of Jesus, and he doubted. He had believed in Jesus before, but he was also believing that the storm would overwhelm him. He was believing one thing and believing something contradictory. I mean, that's the way with us a lot of times when we're in the middle of a situation. We say, yes, I believe in Jesus, but this situation is so difficult. But this guy is so hard on me at work. I believe in Jesus, yes, but this is really a hard thing to endure. And so that's what's happening here. Yes, Peter believes in Jesus, but he also believes in the power of the storm, which he should not because of his proximity to Jesus. See, though God may not immediately stop the storm, he is able to rescue us from drowning and then walk with us through the rest of the storm. Because you see, what happens here, Jesus pulls Peter out of the water, and look at verse 32. It says, when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. They still had to get back in the boat. Peter and Jesus are out there in the middle of the lake. Jesus pulls Peter out, and then they walk back to the boat together. Jesus doesn't stop the storm yet. He walks back through the storm with Peter to the boat. And I can assure you this time, Peter's got a hold of Jesus. He is not letting go. He did not like that feeling of going in the water. He's got a hold of Jesus. He's looking at him and saying, you tell me where to go and I'm with you. All right, just do not let go of my arm. And they're walking back to the boat together. Jesus pulled him out. Jesus rescued Peter from drowning and then walks back with him the rest of the way. The waves are still raging. The wind is still howling. But the difference is this time, Peter is fixed on Jesus. He's not focused about the storm. He's focused on Jesus. Verse 33, the storm stops. And it says, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Jesus had prevented the one who demonstrated great faith from drowning. Then he gets in the boat with the unbelievers, the ones who did not believe in him, and he rescued them as well. You see, believers and unbelievers both need rescue. And that rescue comes in the form of the presence of Jesus through his extended hand. We all need to be rescued. Jesus extended his hand of rescue in this moment. And that can come in all kinds of different ways, but his presence is active in each one. We all need to be rescued. So we have to ask ourselves, do you need to be rescued? Are you in this room right now like the unbelievers sitting in the boat, and you need to be rescued from the eternal storm, from the pain and punishment that we deserve because of our disobedience, and be rescued and get access to heaven? Or do we need to be rescued from drowning in the daily struggles of this world? Do you need to be rescued from prideful attitudes? Do you need to be rescued from lust? Do you need to be rescued from the response that you have to certain people or to certain situations? Do you need to be rescued from gossip? Do you need to be rescued from a lying tongue? Do you need to be rescued from ... What do you need to be rescued from? What is the thing that is drowning you today? What do you need Jesus to reach out and grab your hand and walk you through? What do you need to be rescued from? We all need to be rescued from something and have Jesus walk alongside us through that storm or through that struggle we're dealing with. We all need to be rescued from something. What do you need to be rescued from? And this idea of being rescued is not something that we need to simply understand ourselves, but this is the very thing that we need to be telling other people about, a rescue, that we need to be rescued. You think as Peter is getting rescued out there in the water, he's saying to Jesus, we don't need to go back to the boat. We can just walk to the land, just forget about them. They didn't get out of the boat in the first place. No, they went straight back to the boat. We have been rescued. We need to inform others of the opportunity for rescue. And that's why the vision, the purpose of our church, First Baptist de Queen, Arkansas, is going to be that we communicate near and far that God rescues daily by bringing people to Jesus. Because it's all about getting to Jesus. And we're going to communicate that near and far. Now that comes from Acts 1:8. When Jesus said, the last thing he said to his disciples before he went to heaven, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." Now he talks about in that verse being near in Jerusalem. That's where they were. That was their home base. And then he expands it to Judea, their region, to Samaria, a nearby region, and then to the ends of the world. And so they were to tell the people nearby about God's rescue, and they were to tell the people far away about God's rescue. Now how that looks for us here today is that if you are a believer and you need God's rescue daily, you need to be a part of a church that you can serve in. Scripture speaks of this repeatedly, including Hebrews chapter 10. God has given you a unique spiritual gift to be used by him. And if you're not using it for his glory, you're wasting it. And Jesus actually said, you will lose it if you don't use it. And so if you are even a member on paper, but you are not an active, intentional member, according to Jesus, you're not a member. And you need to be a part. You need to be using that gift for the glory of the kingdom, for God's purposes. Doing that here, having a place of service. And if you'll look in the sermon notes, at the bottom of that sheet are some places of service that you can serve. As you'll notice this morning, we had some parking lot greeters. We had some people out at the VIP station, our guest station, that blue shirts. If you have any questions as a first-time guest, they're the ones to see. I'm wearing a blue shirt. You can talk to me, I guess, too. You can go and you can meet those people. We need more children's ministry workers, tech workers, photographers, videographers, somebody who understands all kinds of social media. We got a block party coming on November 2nd, reaching out to our community here and seeking to minister to them and tell them about Jesus, bring them to Jesus. If you want to be a part of that, we need a lot of help with that. But that's the near. Communicate communicate near and far that God rescues. That is the near. The far are the mission trips that we're going to be doing, not just a single mission trip, but multiple ones. And wherever God desires you to go, whether it's statewide or in the United States or all around the world, on the opposite sides of the planet, that is the far. You know, we need to be communicating near, here where we are, in our church, as well as in our community, and we need to be communicating far, all over the world, to tell people about Jesus and his rescue. So we're going to communicate near and far. We're going to communicate that God rescues. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 18. Peter is writing, and he says, "The Lord will rescue me from every kind of evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom." This is Paul writing here in 2 Timothy. Paul, a believer, writing about God's rescue. We just saw in Matthew chapter 14 that even those who do not believe need rescue. They need eternal rescue, but we as believers need a daily rescue. And even Paul writing about that. The Lord will rescue me. Both believers and unbelievers, Christians and non-Christians, need to be rescued. So we communicate near and far that God rescues daily. That comes from Acts chapter 2, verses 46 and 47. We see the Christian life being a daily thing. It says, "Day by day, attending the temple together, breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." So we see in those two verses, we see the people living a Christian life daily. They did all of those things daily. They met together in small groups daily. They were grateful for the things that God provided them daily. They praised daily. And then we see that because of their daily life with Christ, that they were fruitful. People were saved daily because of their daily Christian life. And so it needs to be a part of who we are. It needs to be just exuded from who we are. And we also, what is vital to our spiritual growth is small groups. Our small group Bible studies are an essential part of that. Because we see that here. We see Jesus himself was a part of a small group. He led those 12 guys. Katie and I go to small groups. Lifeway did a study recently, Lifeway, a big Christian organization, and it said in their study that a person who attends a small group Bible study in addition to the church service grows spiritually on a level several hundred percentage points faster than someone who just attends a church service. And they questioned thousands of people in this study. And if you go to church service, that's great. You need to be a part of that. You need to be growing in that. But not going to small groups, you're missing out on something else God can do for you, on some encouragement that can be offered to you, so that when you are in a time of need, those people can reach out to you and help you. And you're also missing out on a chance of service. You may have something in your life that God can use to speak into the life of somebody else. And by not going to that small group, you are keeping it to yourself. You're not allowing God to use you to minister to someone. And we know from our own records, about half of you in this room do not go to small groups on Sunday. Don't go to small groups on Sunday. Whether you want to get home to eat faster or see the football game, that's why we have DVRs. Whatever you do, you need to be a part of those, because God can do great things through you and with you in those. And if you say, I don't know what small groups you have, then you can see the people in the blue shirts. We'd be happy to take you to one and show you where you can be plugged in and can be used by God. And so we're to communicate near and far that God rescues daily by bringing people to Jesus. And that comes from John chapter 1, verses 41 and 42. The first person who did that, brought someone to Jesus, was a man named Andrew. He encountered Jesus. He saw that Jesus was the Son of God, and his instantaneous reaction was to go and grab his brother and bring him to Jesus. His brother, Peter, who we just saw in Matthew 14, was a great believer in Jesus. But it all began because his brother Andrew brought him to Jesus. His brother Andrew took him to Jesus. And just in the same way that somebody at some point in your past, if you're a believer, brought you to Jesus, you need to be bringing others to Jesus. And so we're going to communicate that God rescues daily. We're going to communicate it near and far by bringing people to Jesus. And so everything we do as a church is going to be filtered through that understanding, because that's why we're here, is to bring people to Jesus. Communicating our rescue as believers from eternal pain and punishment, as well as our rescue daily and having God take care of us on a daily basis. We're going to communicate that and illustrate that and demonstrate that. And that's going to be a part of who we are. We're going to be a bringer. You need to be a bringer, not just bringing people to church, but bringing people to Jesus. And that will change not just your life, it will change everyone's life around you. And so today, whether you need to be rescued from eternal pain and punishment, in a moment we're going to have an invitation time where I invite you to come, invite you to take part in what God is doing in your life, and you need to be rescued from that. Today is the day to do that. Mike and I will be here at the front, and we'd love to talk with you about that and pray with you. But if you've been rescued, if you then don't know what to do, Jesus tells us that too. He says, once you believe in me, you need to be baptized. Baptized. That's the first act of obedience for a believer, is baptism. It not just represents a declaration to everyone, this is who I am, I belong to Jesus. It symbolizes what happens inside of you. Going underwater symbolizes dying to the way you used to live for yourself and for sin. Coming out of the water represents raising to a brand new life, living for Christ. So today, if you need to come and be rescued, today if you need to come and be baptized, we can even do it today. You can be baptized today. But if you also need to come and have somebody pray for you, because there is something going on in your life that you need to be rescued from. You need God to rescue you from this situation. You need God to rescue you from drowning and walk with you through the storm. We would love to pray with you about that as well. Or if you want to come and be a member of the church, an active participant, an intentional member. Even if you are already on the roll, you just want to recommit to that, what that really means biblically, today is the day to do it. And if you've got one of those decisions you need to make, you don't need to be thinking, well, I can do it next week, or I can do it next month. I want to wait, just hold off on this thing. You don't know what's going to happen between now and then. If you need God to rescue you from eternal pain and punishment, do it today. Don't wait for next week, because 15,000 things can happen between now and next Sunday. Do it right now. So I'm going to pray for us. Y'all are going to stand and sing after I say amen. And then I want anyone who has one of those decisions, just come and we will talk to you and pray with you and take care of it.